the Bain Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, monstrous savings emerge from the dens of discount beneath your virtual feet. Forgetting where the keys are proved to be quantum entangled with the land of lost socks. Plus, we continue the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Uncompromising Honor, all right now. Welcome to the Bain Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Bain Senior Editor Tony Daniel. Hey, we would be extremely grateful if you would take a bit of time and go over to iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and give the Bain Free Radio Hour a 5-star rating. And if you want to give us any suggestions or comments, you can always email me at podcast@bain.com. Thanks very much for that. We continue our excellent conversation this time with Eric Flint and Walter H. Hunt, the authors of new Ring of Fire novel, 1636, The Atlantic Encounter. In case you don't know the premise of the Ring of Fire books, they are about a whole town of West Virginians who were flung back in time to continental Germany in the 17th century and how they have to adapt and eventually they thrive. In the Atlantic Encounter, a pair of Grantville uptimers working for the good guys in Grantville, connected to Mike Stearns, sail to America, where they encounter Puritans, the Dutch in New Amsterdam, and that tenacious English colony called Jamestown. Along the way, they deploy their secret weapon, a reconnaissance dirigible, to take on the French and try to provide a new destiny for the New World. And we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Uncompromising Honor. Now here's the news. Hey, all month long we are running the Monsters of August ebook sale. Get discounts on all Eric Correa's Monster Hunter International series ebooks. Save over 28% on Monster Hunter Siege and Monster Hunter Guardian. That's a savings of $2 per ebook. Plus, save $1 on all the other ebooks in the Monster Hunter International series, all of them. These discounts will be available wherever Bain ebooks are distributed. That includes Amazon, BNN, Apple Books, and of course, at Bain ebooks at Bain.com. The Monsters of August sale, amazing discounts on all Larry Correa's Monster Hunter International series ebooks. Also this month, excellence is afoot. The Bain hardcovers for August are now at booksellers everywhere. First up is 1636, The Atlantic Encounter by Eric Flint and Walter H. Hunt. With the colonization of the North American continent came chattel slavery and the near extermination of native populations. But now, in a changed 1636, the newly formed United States of Europe have a chance to make history's misdeeds right. Can a new course be taken? If anybody can make it so, it will be those can-do folks from Grantville. Also out in hardcovers at booksellers is Days of Burning, Days of Wrath by Tom Kratman. Amid the chaos of war, a new leader arises. He is Hamilcar, Carrera's young son. Hamilcar stands poised to obliterate the last enemy base on his planet. Revenge was always going to be his, but now Carrera may finally get what he least expected: renewal. Days of Burning, Days of Wrath by Tom Kratman and 1636, The Atlantic Encounter by Eric Flint and Walter H. Hunt are now available at booksellers everywhere. This is part 2 of a 2-part interview with Eric Flint and Walter H. Hunt. Part 1 is available on last week's podcast. Well, I want to welcome Eric Flint and Walter H. Hunt to the podcast, back to the podcast. Hello, guys.
Hi, guys.
It's great to see you this time. We are recording a video version of it. Of course, you might also just be listening out there. We're going to have both versions available as we've been doing. Eric Flint's a modern master of alternate history fiction, and with With more than 3 million books in print, he's the creator of the multiple New York Times best-selling Ring of Fire series, starting with 1632. He's written with David Drake, David Weber. I think you're working on a new Honorverse book.
Yeah, I am.
And was for many years a labor union activist and lives outside of Chicago over there on the other side of the line. Walter H. Hunt is the creator of the popular Dark Wings space adventure series. He has which are available at Bain eBooks, by the way. He has nearly 20 years experience in high tech as a software engineer and technical writer. His writing reflects an abiding interest in history. And this is a pretty prime example of what we're going to talk about.
Really?
His area of college study, which is what he studied, but science fiction has been his favorite reading material since he watched Neil Armstrong walk on the moon when he was but a lad. He is an active Freemason, as shown by the symbology on his shirt, and a lifelong baseball fan. He lives as shown by all the baseball references in the book, and he lives in Eastern Massachusetts with his wife and daughter.
Daughter's out of town now.
So at booksellers now is Eric Flint and Walter H. Hunt's novel 1636, The Atlantic Encounter, which is a book in the Ring of Fire series.
Yeah.
One other historical fact that you have to deal with in the book, and you do deal with it, is when they come across slavery in New Amsterdam. And there's a nice little section where our characters talk about this, and because they're going to decide what to do about it. We got uptimers and downtimers who are encountering a slave market, basically.
Yeah, and not just in Virginia.
No. Actually, there was a stretch in American history where there were more slaves in New York City than anywhere else. And in fact, the book Walter and I did, Council of Fire, actually takes it up more. It's actually more of a prominent feature in that novel than it is in the one that's coming out 2 days from now. But it's by the time most Americans become aware of American history, you're at the pre-revolutionary period, and then slavery's in the South and the North. Okay, you go back a little earlier. No, you had slavery not in every colony, but you certainly did in New York,
and not much earlier. There were slave auctions in Faneuil Hall in Boston in the 1750s. Slavery doesn't disappear from New England until just before the Revolution.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the start of the people call the 1619 Project. That's when the first slaves were brought over the United States in 1619 and weren't taken to the South.
So, I mean, this is the big dilemma for if you're from the future and you travel back to the past, and you hit a historical circumstance that just morally outrages you. What are you going to do? I mean, You're not going to be able to change the entire of society, right? So, how are you going to deal with it?
There are two. The central hero of the whole series, Mike Stearns, is said on several occasions that the two great evils of that time that he wants to, if not eliminate, at least cripple them, are chattel slavery in the New World and the second serfdom in Eastern Europe. And in different ways, they're trying to deal with both of those issues to one degree of success or another. And the one thing is that in both cases, because we're in the early 17th century, they're catching both the development of New World chattel slavery and the development of second serfdom in Eastern Europe pretty early. They're not really entrenched yet. So there are things that can be done. But there's no magic wand either. There's no there's other books that are coming out soon in the series are Calabar's War, 1636 Calabar's War. It was written by Chuck Gannon and Robert Waters, and it's coming out in April. And that deals directly with the issue of slavery. It's focused particularly in South America and the Caribbean. And then And then even prior to that, Chuck and I are coming out with 1637, the No Peace Beyond the Line, where the issue of slavery is a very prominent feature. And in particular, the Dutch have to start dealing with it. And that's also going to be a major feature in the anthology, the New World Anthology. I'm not sure when that'll come out. Probably not till 2022, I think, because we've got lined up ahead of it.
I imagine she'll probably, we'll see where Tony puts it.
Well, yeah, I mean, right. I can only get so many.
I bet she might put it next fall, 2021.
It's possible, yeah.
We will see how many.
We'll see how it goes. Yeah.
See if we need a Ring of Fire book that season.
Well, we'll have two, because we also almost have Grantville Gazette 9 finished. The only thing I'm waiting is we're waiting on me to write my story, and I'm waiting on Tom Kidd to finish the cover. So,
right, because you got to write the story based on the cover.
Right. Well, I could start now because I know what it is, because Tom and I worked it out. But
so
on with it.
Tell us about New Amsterdam and Jamestown, and the way that, because the basic point of all the Ring of Fire is that a town from 2000 West Virginia gets thrown back in time to 1632 in the middle of Germany, and now they've made their way to the New World. And Pete, one of them doesn't even want to go see West Virginia if they get a chance, because they, that's gone now. What are these towns like, and how are they subtly different than they were because Grantville has shown up?
Well, the first thing you got to understand about all these towns is how small they are. I mean, New York probably doesn't even have 1,000 people in it. New York City, I'm talking about. Walter would know more than I would about Jamestown and Boston, but none of them are big. I mean, we're talking what would be considered small towns today.
Yeah, Boston's very small.
Yeah,
it's on a small peninsula with 3 big hills on it. Only one of which is still there. New Amsterdam, when you think about New York, you think about the Empire State Building, or downtown. All of that is outside of New Amsterdam. New Amsterdam is right down near the very tip of Manhattan, and it's tiny. There are garden plots and bodies of water inside New Amsterdam. We found a map. I think we put a map in the book? I think we did.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's maps.
And it's tiny.
We got good maps.
We do. Mike Knopf does a great job. Yeah, there is a map of New Amsterdam, and it's tiny. The Boweries are beyond the edge, and we think of the Bowery Boys. They're way down in the bottom of Manhattan. But that's
there. And you mentioned that. I guess Harlem is where the farms were that supported the place.
Yeah.
Right?
Harlem doesn't even exist in 1636.
Yeah. Is there a canal yet to be filled in later?
No.
And made into Canal Street?
New Amsterdam is
where I spent most of the 90s.
15 to 20 years old, and it hasn't really hit its stride yet. In fact, it's bleeding money. The 19 who are the grandees who run the colony from Amsterdam are losing money in a big way. They haven't even fought the natives yet. That's Keith's War is 5 years away.
But they know their fate because they have the history, and so.
But they know it's not going to happen because England is out of the picture, so they don't know.
So they have no, yeah.
Well, it goes beyond that. This will be taken up more in the anthology, but the Netherlands, which have been reunited because the Cardinal Infante Don Fernando, who's the younger brother of the King of Spain, did succeed in conquering a great deal of the Dutch provinces, and then he couldn't get Amsterdam, so they wind up cutting a deal, and they reunited, but they established freedom of religion and so forth. That's all covered in 1633 and 1634, the Baltic War. Since then, the Netherlands have stayed on very good terms with the United States of Europe. They make it a point of that. They're not formally allied because that would. Fernando has a problem on his hands, which is his older brother is not at all happy with what he did by basically carving out the Netherlands as his own kingdom, is what it amounts to. So he's trying to avoid any, anything that would officially trigger off a war with his brother. But in practice, they get along quite well. And Mike Stern's attitude, and he's no longer in power, but he's very influential, has always been that what he wants to see in the New World is to retain a number of different European colonies there, plus the native development, so that there's no one power that really becomes super dominant the way the English colonies did. And he thinks that's the best way to keep what's sometimes called the New World Holocaust from happening.
So that's the real motive for keeping France from.
Yeah, they don't want the French to establish. Yeah, exactly.
To do what? Yeah. Okay.
No, exactly. They're not particularly trying to drive the French out of Canada, but they don't want the French to. They don't want the French to become what England became in our own history. That's basically what they're doing. And they're also
really interested in doing it, though.
Huh?
The French want to do it. They're all for it.
Yeah, I know. So that was always Mike Stern's attitude, and he's often in Eastern Europe now fighting wars, but his position's been replaced. His position politically has been replaced by Ed Piazza, who's now not in this. Well, yeah, toward the end of this novel, he's now the new prime minister of. I'm trying to remember, Walter. When exactly do we end Atlantic encounter? Is
June.
Huh?
June.
June, yeah. So Piazza is just basically on the verge of being elected the new prime minister. But what has been happening through the novel is that he's the president of the province of Thuringia Franconia, but he's also got what amounts to a shadow government, which is pretty standard in a parliamentary procedure. But he's the shadow prime minister who's out of office, but he also happens to be the president of the richest province in the country. So that gives him a lot of. This expedition is essentially, it's unofficial, but it's really being financed and supported by that province. That's how it worked.
So Walter was telling me about, he put some baseball references in here and such. And it brought up the interesting thought that you have to, now that we are 20 years away from 2000, you have two different sets of the past that you have to deal with, because they can't make baseball references to anything, that's happened in recent history, right?
Well, yeah.
It's something in this series, and it gets to be more of a problem farther you go, that you have to be careful about, which is that, and don't forget, there's close to 200 people writing something in this series. So it's, many of them are just writing one story, but people, you have to keep reminding them and reminding yourself that remember, the only modern technology they have, other than what they may have developed since the Ring of Fire themselves, is whatever existed prior to May of 2000. So,
No flash drives.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's things like that. You got to be very careful.
No smartphones, no streaming media. Computers look like boxes on the desk.
Well, they still do. I mean, I do mine, but
okay.
Okay, I'm old-fashioned. Screw it. I don't like laptops. But yeah, you do. You have to be careful about not giving people technology that some damn nitpicker is going to say, that wasn't invented till the year 2007.
So, Eric, have you ever considered throwing a modern day town back into Grantville? So you have 3 sets of time problems.
No.
You can get your
One thing
iPhones.
that has changed is that if you go back and read the first novel, 1632, there's a scene where the Croat cavalry has raided Grantville, and they're charging down the street, and they get ambushed by people firing from the streets. If you go to Mannington today, when I wrote it, that was accurate to what Mannington looked like, but they tore all that down. And if you go there now, it's all these low, modern, fast food joints. And that scene would not work at all. So be it. But no, I have not thought of doing that, and I wish you hadn't brought it up. I'll have nightmares about it.
It sounds like a nightmare.
I would like to have Stefan and the Dyer woman to actually get to that part of Virginia and see it, and see things and have them not recognize any of them, but certainly no evidence of anything other than that, because that would be crazy.
What else do we need to talk about? The dirigible. What's the possible uses we might see of the dirigible?
Well, it's primarily there for reconnaissance. The
thing that, and this actually features more even than it does an Atlantic encounter in the book that Chuck and I have coming out in November, is the big thing that puts something up in the air 700 feet. It's not a weapon, it's a platform, and you can see a long, long ways when other people can't. And if you do it right, you can make yourself almost invisible if you do it right. You have to pick the right time and this, that, and the other. But people don't see you, and you're seeing them. And it's something that's actually figured a number of times, a number of different novels in the series, is that the uptimers do fairly quickly have aircraft that, not a whole lot, but they do have, and they're very, I mean, they're not much bigger than a Piper Cub, but still, you got aircraft, and they're not all that effective usually as weapons, but the reconnaissance it enables you to do, as long as the weather's good, it just changes everything, I mean, prior to that, armies could march and no one knew where they were unless you could send out a cavalry patrol to find them. And now all of a sudden you got some guy up there in a machine up in the air, and he can see where you are 100 miles away, And
we show that in 3 or 4 different places in the book.
I'm sorry?
Off Block Island, we show it off Block Island. We show it in their expedition up the Chesapeake, and then of course we show it right at the end in Virginia. And each time we're trying to emphasize exactly that this is an advantage that the other side doesn't have, and doesn't know that it's at a disadvantage until it's used on.
Now, as to what will happen with that dirigible after the end of this book, and what will happen afterwards, I don't know. Walter and I haven't talked about it.
Well, you named it the John Wayne. I was speculating that because Eric thinks John Wayne was probably like a big old bag of hot air, but
he named it. I didn't.
Okay, Walter named it.
He's a Freemason.
He was.
Oh, was that?
Oh, he's a Freemason.
John Wayne was a Mason. I did not know.
Sure was.
I didn't know that.
Oh, that's the secret Illuminati thing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he came up with a name, and I wasn't gonna make up.
It sounded good. It sounded like they picked somebody who they liked, and there's no reason for them not to like him.
I agree.
He hadn't died in 2000, or was he already dead? But he seemed like a good sort of all-American hero guy. He was long dead, but he was this Presidential Medal of Freedom guy, the all-American who's in the longest day.
There's plenty of reasons why Americans would name him, sure. I mean, if it'd been me, I probably would have picked Humphrey Bogart, but
Oh yeah, or Bruce Dern.
Huh?
for Black Sunday.
Yeah.
So, what is coming out? What are you guys working on?
Well, what we are working on next, what Walter and I will be doing next, is the sequel to 1636 Cardinal Virtues. We're doing the next stage of the French Civil War sort of is just getting rolling at the end of, just getting started at the end of Cardinal Virtues, and that's what Walter and I will be working on next. Other than that, I'm hoping.
We did that.
Yeah, I'm hoping we can continue that story. I really like it, but it's like we have to see how the sales are. We just don't know yet. Book came out in November. We shouldn't. Usually takes about a year before you really know how well book's doing.
And I have 2 other series in progress.
And if it's doing well enough and Tony's amenable, we'll continue that story. Yeah, that one's a lot of fun, and Walter and I spent a lot of time developing that world, and it's an unusual fantasy world. And it's one that.
Yeah, that's cool. Council of Fire.
Bagged me
is the
for
name of that book.
all the history there. 18th century is really my wheelhouse. I know a lot about that period.
Well, and also, we're also working with both Native American and African mythology, which is, it's not, it's a different fantasy setting than you usually encounter. So
That's about to be out in mass market in the fall. I can't remember exactly when, but that'll.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
soon.
Yeah, I saw that, and I forgot what month, but yeah, it's coming out.
Yeah, that's the Montcalm Wolf buddy novel.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. It's it's a fantasy world where magic. Let's not even get into it. It's cool. So, what else are you working on, Walter, that you might want to mention?
Well, I've done 2 novels for Wordfire Press. This is the second one. It's a series of alternate history novels, for crypto history novels about mesmerism, which is a 19th century fake science. There's one called Elements of Mind, and this one's called Harmony and Light. And there's a third one called Pass into Shadow, which I've written 20,000 words of.
Cool. Those will no doubt be available as ebooks at Bain eBooks, because we have
both ebooks. The first one has
agreement.
an audio book, and the second one's going to have an audio book shortly. And I'm really pleased with those too. Last summer, Ring of Fire Press published a alternate history novel called City by the Bay, which is set in Novaya Rossiya, which is California, except California is part of the Russian Empire, because this is a world in which there's no United States. So there's British North America, French North America, New Spain, and Novaya Rossiya, which is the Russian West Coast. And that came out very well. I'm very pleased with that. And I hope that there will be a point at which the base novel that explains why there's no United States will appear. I haven't finished it yet. But they got this out, and I think it's very good.
Cool. And Eric, we're seeing the return of Victor, and what are those characters' names? And the
Victor Kasha, Anton Zilwicki, those are the 2. There are others. Tanya Polani. What's happening here? This is the book I'm working on with David Weber. It's a direct sequel to Cauldron of Ghosts, which was the last book we did together in the Honorverse. But it also picks up, to some degree, it serves as a sequel to Uncompromising Honor, because it picks up, David has sort of like 3 threads in that series, kind of. Well, it's kind of like 1632 series, it's branched out. But mostly it's a sequel to Cauldron of Ghosts, and it follows up on after Michelle Henke has taken Mesa, which is at the end. And well, I don't want to, for people who have not read those books, I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but the same characters now have something new they have to figure out. Is they're trying to figure out where the alignment is. There's this mysterious and very malevolent force that's been screwing around in the background that they know is there, but most people don't accept that it's there, although some do. Some more and more are doing it. But to a large degree, what this novel's about is their search to try to find where it is so they can put a, sculpture.
And they're kind of spy adventurer type guys.
I'm sorry?
They're kind of spy thriller type guys.
Yeah. It's kind of like Anton's more the, although he gets in plenty of adventures, but he's sort of the analyst, and Victor is more the on the ground operative. And I can't really say much more about that without. I just don't want to give away too much of the plot. But
you got a title for it?
The current title is Cloak of Alignment. It was Cloak of Evil, which I never liked. Even I'm the one who came up with it, but I didn't like it. Right now, what I proposed to David, and he hasn't said yes or no, but since it's been quite a while since he hasn't said yes or no, I just said, all right, fine, I'm going to go ahead and do it. And he can always change it later if he wants to. But I've changed it to Cloak of Alignment, which makes sense if in the context of the book. The bad guys are called the Alignment, but there's two different alignments. Never mind. And it's a slow book to write because there's a whole lot of new things that have to be worked out. And I'm doing the first draft, and David's tied up with other things. I'm developing stuff, and then I send it to him, and he says, it doesn't really work. So there's a lot of rewriting involved.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a good book. I can say that. I'm pleased with it. It's just, it's I'm winding up having to budget more time for it than I initially thought, because the problem is this book is actually going into new stuff, which normally the books I've done with David have been following him, not preceding him, but this is. So it takes a lot more figuring out, including he has to figure stuff out.
What anything else we want to say about the Atlantic encounter?
It's a good novel. It really is. I mean, I think people will enjoy it. And there have been stories set in the New World that have come out in the series already, but this sort of marks a new step forward in that it kind of gives an anchor for a lot of other books that will be coming out later and other stories. And first of which will be this anthology we're doing.
And Chuck's new book in the Caribbean.
I'm pleased with it. Huh? I'm sorry.
Chuck's and your new book in the Caribbean dovetails into it, and we made sure that it fit, because Chuck and I had a couple conversations.
Yeah, because Chuck and I have been doing a different line of story that takes place in the Caribbean, and there's an overlap. You got to be careful that works out okay. Which
we work very hard at consistency.
Yeah. It's
they keep us honest, which is good.
That's a Ring of Fire staple, is the consistency and the coolness of the whole thing. Well, the book out at booksellers right now is 1636, The Atlantic Encounter, by Eric Flint and Walter H. Hunt. Eric and Walter, thank you so much for talking with us about the Atlantic Encounter.
Pleasure.
All right.
That was part 2 of a 2-part interview with Eric Flint and Walter H. Hunt. Part 1 is available on last week's podcast. Here is another entry in David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Honor keeps her promise. The Solarian League. For hundreds of years they have borne the banner of human civilization, but the bureaucratic mandarins who rule today's League are corrupt and looking for scapegoats. They've decided the upstart Star Kingdom of Manticore must be annihilated. Uncompromising courage. Honor Harrington has worn the Star Kingdom's uniform for half a century. Very few know war the way Honor Harrington does. So far, hers has been a voice of caution. But now the Mandarins have committed atrocities such as the galaxy has not known in 1,000 years. They have finally killed too many of the people Honor Harrington loves. Uncompromising vengeance. Now Honor Harrington is coming for the Solarian League, and hell is riding in her wake. And now, David Weber's Uncompromising Honor.
So Technodyne's accuracy estimates at extended range were almost on the money, Rear Admiral Rosiak said, using the hand unit to highlight a column of numbers on the briefing room's bulkhead smart wall. We can't be positive, but the hot wash analysis suggests Technodyne's estimate was accurate to within 5 or 6%, which, he looked around the unhappy faces of Admiral Isotalo's staff, was higher than the estimate Maylene and I plugged into our pre-battle planning. Unfortunately, ONI's estimate of the Manti missile defense's capabilities was nowhere near accurate, so even with the better-than-expected accuracy, The actual hit ratio still sucked vacuum. In fairness to O&I, ma'am, Rear Admiral Lamazana put in, nobody who's gone toe-to-toe with the Manties has gotten home again to tell us how good their defenses really are. The best anyone's been able to do is extrapolate from the loss ratios, using our own capabilities as a baseline. She shrugged ever so slightly. It seems pretty clear that baseline was too optimistic, but it was the only one they had. Jane Isotalo's jaw tightened at that unpalatable reminder, but it was exactly the sort of reminder Lamazana was supposed to give her, and she nodded in recognition. So your recommendation is what, Bart? She asked after a second. We have two options, ma'am, either of which has pros and cons, Rosiak replied. One is to simply fire the biggest damned missile salvo the galaxy's ever seen. I don't care how good their defenses are on a ship-for-ship basis. Hit them with enough birds to completely saturate their counter-missiles and point defense, and something's getting through. Assuming we're right about the blind fire hit probabilities, my people estimate that a 30,000 missile launch should produce a minimum of 400 hits despite their defensive capabilities. Assuming they've actually shown us all of those capabilities yet, Lamazana added in a carefully neutral tone. Assuming that, Rosiak acknowledged, nodding at the intelligence officer. I think Maylene's right that we have to assume they may not have. Although I also have to say I find it a little difficult to believe anyone could see 6,000 missiles coming at him and not pull out all the stops against them, however good he thought his defenses were. Having said that, I don't have any desire at all to get caught with our arses hanging out the way certain other people have. 2 or 3 people, Isotalo among them, surprised themselves with smiles at his last sentence. Although it wasn't really funny given how many of their fellows, officers and enlisted, those other people had gotten killed. And Bart can say that when Romulus or Maylene couldn't, she reflected, because he's battle fleet, just like Crandall and Filaretta. And he does have a point. I realize we have deep pockets where missile pods are concerned, she said then. I'd really prefer not to use them up at the rate of 5,000 or 6,000 per heavy cruiser, though, she added in a desert-dry tone. So let's hear option 2, Bart. Should I assume you're thinking in terms of two-step? Yes, ma'am, I am. Rosiak waved at the smart wall without looking away from Isotalo. On top of their active defenses in EW, Foudroyant CIC agrees with my own people's conclusion that the Manties have to have found some way to protect against down-the-throat shots. Nobody's prepared to go out on a limb over exactly how they're doing that, but my own feeling is that they have to have found some way to create a sidewall to cover the ahead and astern aspects of a wedge. Not to dispute Bart's conclusion, ma'am, Rear Admiral Romala said, but if they've managed that, they have to be playing even faster and looser with physics than our worst-case assumptions. Not necessarily, Captain Malati Raghavendra said. Foudroyant's captain sat at Isotalo's left elbow, directly across from Romulus, both because it was her right as the task force's flag captain and because Isotalo respected her level-headed, one might almost have said phlegmatic, common sense. Like Isotalo and Rosiak, Raghavendra was battle fleet, but she'd started in engineering, not tactical, which helped explain why she had so far attained only captain's rank in the Admiral-heavy SLN. What do you mean, Malati? The Admiral asked. Well, ma'am, speaking as an ex-snipe, there's no real problem with generating call it a bow wall, for want of a better term. You'd need generators that were a lot bigger and more powerful to produce a wall with that much area, but that's pretty straightforward. Just a matter of engineering, really. The problem, she nodded at Romulus, is that every time you put it up and closed the front of your wedge, your ship wouldn't be able to accelerate. But these people weren't accelerating. In fact, if they have something like that, it might be the reason they weren't. They were rolling ship, Captain, Romulus pointed out, but his expression was thoughtful, not dismissive. Yes, and a lot faster than they could have on thrusters, Raghavendra agreed. They have to be using their wedges for that, but we don't know how quickly they could put the thing up or down, and none of us were looking for any evidence of it at the time. One thing my tactical officer noticed, though, was that after they initially rolled up against our fire, none of their ships ever changed attitude twice in a row. Twice in a row? Isotalo repeated. What I mean, ma'am, is that they were obviously clearing telemetry or sensor channels to take peeks downrange at our birds, but they did it in a staggered sequence, using a different ship each time. I'm wondering if that was because of the time it took to deactivate and activate the bow wall generators. The actual engagement time was too short for us to draw any kind of conclusions, but I think it's worth bearing the possibility in mind.
Agreed.
Romalis nodded and returned his gaze to Isotalo.
And I think I see where Bart was going with this. For them to handle that much fire without any evidence of significant damage, whatever they're using to protect the forward aspect of their wedges must be a hell of a lot tougher than anything ships that size ought to mount. I wouldn't like to face that kind of beating with a super dreadnought sidewalls, to be honest. And as the captain points out, the sheer area they're covering means they must have given up a lot of volume and power supply to cram the suckers in. You have to wonder if they can mount sidewall generators equally heavy, don't you?
That question did cross my mind, sir, Rosiak replied. If so, we may be looking at a flipped situation. One in which we can expect better penetration and more hits going for the other fellow's sidewalls rather than trying to cross his T. And that's a much narrower target, which means we need more accuracy to hit it. Again, a big enough deluge of missiles would probably give us the hits we need through blind chance. But Admiral Isotalo's right about the number of birds we'd need on a per-ship basis. Expenditures like that would burn through even our ammo supply before we ever got to the primary missions. But to avoid them, we need to get close enough to maintain our control links right up to the terminal phase, which, he pointed out, turning back to Isotalo, is one of the things Two-Step is designed to do. Yes, it is, she acknowledged. She thought about it for a moment, then sat forward in her chair and tapped her index finger on the surface of the briefing room table. Yes, it is, she repeated more briskly. To be honest, I still have reservations about the concept. God knows we've discussed it enough for all of you to know what they are, but I think Bart's right. We've got to shorten the control loop if we're going to hurt these bastards. In fact, I'd love to get close enough to be able to launch inside their hypergenerator cycle loops, and only a drooling idiot would let us get that close with an end-space approach. So, I'm afraid that only leaves Two-Step, Isidore. She turned to Captain Isidore Hampton, the task force's staff astrogator. Hampton was a swarthy, dark-eyed fellow who normally radiated an impression of calm competence. He still looked competent, but calm would have been pushing it at the moment, she thought, and with good reason. I can't see another approach, she told him. I realize it'll be putting a lot of pressure on you, but if anybody can pull it off, you can. And before we start, let me say that I don't see where the tactical situation's likely to be a lot worse, even if your numbers are off in the end. What I'm saying, and this is for the record, is that I fully realize the difficulty of what I'm asking you to do. I've made my decision to try it anyway based on all the information available to me, but I don't expect or demand miracles. Having said that, I do expect you to do your damnedest to make it work anyway.
Ma'am, we can do it, Hampton replied. We'll have to come in on the far side to avoid the resonance zone, though.
Understood, Isotalo said. Every wormhole created a resonance zone in the volume between it and the end-space star with which it was associated. Translations out of hyper and back into end-space in those areas weren't merely risky, they were extremely dangerous. So TF-1027 would be forced to approach the terminus from the side farthest from Prime. That would extend the jump somewhat, but the Manties were also positioned outside the terminus, probably because they knew she couldn't micro-jump into the area between them and the primary even if she'd wanted to. We figured that when we first started looking at Two-Step, she reminded him, and at least the Manties seem to be cooperating.
So far, ma'am, Hampton acknowledged, and I'm fairly confident of hitting the distance pretty close. Translation scatter's likely to turn formation keeping into a god-awful mess, though, especially that close to the terminus.
Several heads nodded, and she grimaced. I know, she said. But somebody way back in one of the ancient wet navies on Old Terra said something one time that I'm afraid applies here. To paraphrase, some things have to be left to chance in a battle. I know that's anathema to any good Battlefleet CO, but in this case, she smiled tightly at Romalis and Lamazana.
I think we're going to have to try it the sloppy, make-it-up-as-you-go-along frontier fleet way. A chuckle ran around the briefing room despite the tension, and she sat back again. Instead of sending in one of the task groups, Bart, I want Bonrepos and Sukahara to take the lead together. We'll hold Santini back as the follow-through. And since we're talking about shortening our command loops, we might as well go whole hog on it. This time, her smile could have been a shark's. That's interesting, sir, Commander Wozniak said. What's interesting, Tom? Lessem asked, looking up from the tactical problem he'd been playing through on his command chair's repeater plot. It looks like those donkeys of theirs may have more internal endurance than we'd thought, the ops officer replied. With your permission? He raised his eyebrows, a finger hovering over one of the icons on his touchscreen, and Lessem nodded. Wozniak's finger touched the icon, and a time-compressed tracking recording appeared on Lessem's display. The Commodore gazed at it, then grunted. Wonderful, he said sourly. Don't know how useful it'd be under normal battle conditions, Wozniak said, but it does give them some interesting options, doesn't it? One way to put it, Lessem acknowledged. The Solarian task force had started decelerating hard after the dismal failure of its initial attack. In fact, they'd gone to 4.4 kps squared, 92% power for a Nevada. He didn't think for a moment that they'd given up, though. If they'd wanted to do that, all they had to do was translate out. No, they were only buying themselves more time to think. Assuming they maintained their increased deceleration, they would reach a zero velocity relative to the terminus 12 minutes sooner and 824,935 kilometers farther from it. And from a resting launch, a range of 2.7 light seconds would give missile flight times of almost exactly 42 seconds for the SLN's pre-war standard missile. Which was interesting, given the 42.7-second hypergenerator cycle time of a Saganami C. In the meantime, however, a host of tiny impeller signatures sped towards the decelerating battle cruisers from the far larger freighters following well behind them. Apparently, the Solarian version of the donkey could forward deliver itself, and presumably its missile pods, to a designated end user. As Wozniak said, not something that was likely to be critically important under most battle circumstances, but irritating as hell nonetheless. And maybe more than just irritating, too, he thought. I wonder... Get me Captain Amberline, please, George, he said. Aye, sir, the comm officer replied, and 3 seconds later, Captain Harriet Amberline appeared on Lessem's comm display. Behind her, he could see the bridge of HMS David K. Brown and the FSV's tactical section. Yes, sir, she said. I don't trust these people, Lessem told her. They've obviously picked their decel to get inside our hypergenerator cycles in a normal space approach. In fact, I think they've picked it a little bit too obviously. I really hope they don't think I'm stupid enough to let them actually get to that point without translating the hell out of here, and if they don't, that suggests they have something else in mind. A micro-jump that short's tricky as hell, sir. At the very least, they're likely to get a lot of scatter, she pointed out, and he nodded at the confirmation that she was thinking the same thing he was. Might not matter a lot, he pointed out in turn. They've got 10 times the hulls we do, and the Nevadas actually have more broadside tubes than a Saganami C. I know we can fire off bore and they can't, but that's still a lot of missiles if they can ever get into their effective range of us. For that matter, the Nevadas have half again our energy broadside too, if they could get really close. He let his voice trail off, and Amberline nodded soberly. Just this once, she was delighted that his collar carried the twin planets of a Commodore, and hers carried only the 4 golden pips of a junior-grade captain. Given how much slower your generator's going to cycle, I think it's time you went elsewhere, he continued. I promise we'll look after your waifs, and I'm giving you Minion and Lancaster for escorts. They've got less of the astro control people on board than Aubussier. She nodded again. Randy will have the rendezvous coordinates for you in a minute. Lessem waved one hand at Lieutenant Commander Ronald Kivlikan, Crew Ron 912 Staff Astrogator. Somebody will be along one way or the other to let you know how things work out. I'll be expecting good news, sir. Then we'll try our best to give it to you. and your going away present's probably going to help in that regard. Lesson clear.
That freighter or whatever of theirs just translated out, ma'am, Rear Admiral Rosiak reported. Looks like a couple of their destroyers went with it.
Damn, Admiral Isotalo said mildly. Obviously, she isn't a drooling idiot. Not a surprise, but one could always hope.
Nothing wrong with hoping, ma'am,
Rear Admiral Romalis observed. The Chief of Staff stood beside her command chair, watching the master plot with her.
Not as long as you don't let yourself get wedded to building your plans based on what you hope will happen, and in this case you haven't done that.
Nice of you to say so, anyway. Isotalo swiveled her chair thoughtfully from side to side while she pondered the plot. The icon of what she'd become privately convinced had to be a purpose-built fast support ship had just vanished from it, accompanied by 2 more impeller signatures CIC had tagged as destroyers, which suggested the Manti CO had figured out what she was up to. On the other hand, she might not have too. The task force had been decelerating at its current rate for 23 minutes, and its approach velocity was down to 10,179 kps. In just over 9.5 minutes, it would enter the 7.6 million kilometer maximum powered range of a standard Javelin missile. The chance of a Javelin scoring a hit at 25.3 light seconds against the defenses which had turned a 6,000-strong cataphract launch into mincemeat was non-existent, but the range was going to go on falling. She needed to get at least another 10 or 15 light seconds closer if she hoped for a decent hit percentage, and the odds that the Manti CO would sit still for another 14 minutes while she closed another 5.3 million kilometers struck her as low. It was possible the Manti expected her to try it, but neither one of them expected Isotalo to get away with it. On the other hand, Isotalo had already fired a 6,000 missile salvo at her, and she had to have seen the Husky streaming forward from Isotalo's own supply ships to replenish TG 1027.3. That meant she knew Isotalo could fire a much, much larger salvo of cataphracts if she flushed all of her task group's pods at once. Nor would Isotalo need to incorporate a ballistic phase this time. The Mantis were already inside her powered cataphract envelope, with a total flight time of only 210 seconds. No doubt the Manti wished TF-1027 would fire a bazillion or so missiles in her direction. There'd be plenty of time for her damned cruisers to translate safely into hyper, laughing down their sleeves at the stupid Solis, as a couple of 100,000 expensive cataphracts saw their targets abruptly vanish and self-destructed at the end of their powered runs. But the support ship's cycle time had to be close to 2 minutes, so it was at least possible the Manti CO was simply getting it safely out of harm's way before the cataphracts got inside her cycle time. That didn't necessarily mean she knew what Isotalo was actually planning. Sure it doesn't, Jane, she thought sardonically. On the other hand, even if she does know what you're thinking, you may still get away with it.
Any time now, I think, Commodore Lessem murmured, watching the range continue to fall.
I beg your pardon, sir, Commander Torrey said, and the Commodore shook himself and smiled crookedly.
Just making a bet with myself about when this fellow's going to pull the trigger, he said.
I'm wondering that myself, sir, the Chief of Staff admitted.
And the other thing I'm wondering is how cautious this particular rat is when it comes to sniffing the cheese.
Lessem shoved back up out of his command chair and crossed the flag bridge to stand looking over Lieutenant Commander Kivlikan's shoulder.
I'd hate to have them leave before the party begins.
Torrey nodded, standing at Kivlikan's other shoulder and watching the plot. The Solis had been decelerating for 34 minutes. The range was down to 7 million kilometers, and their closing velocity had fallen to 7,293 kps. They were actually in extreme Javelin range now, and they couldn't expect Cruron 912 to let them close much further, under normal circumstances at least. Lessem considered the geometry a moment longer, then nodded decisively.
Better to encourage them, I think, he said, and looked over his shoulder at Commander Wozniak. Execute Picador, Tom.
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Uncompromising Honor. And that's it for the podcast, thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. and the makings of quantum stone soup, which is oh so much better than stone soup because it's made by a bunch of villagers through multiple dimensions and ends up tasting just like quantum chicken soup, which is not dissimilar to quantum alligator soup and quantum rattlesnake soup. Plus, thanks, praise, and gratitude to Eric Flint and Walter H. Hunt, authors of 1636, The Atlantic Encounter. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.